This video, we're going to be talking about people pleasing. And before we begin, let's lay out a quick agenda for what this video will look like. First, we're going to define what exactly is people pleasing. After that, we'll look at the effects it has on mental health, on self-control, and on relationships. And once we understand that, we'll look at why do people please? What is the root cause of people pleasing? And then we'll look at why is it so destructive and why does it cause kind of the opposite effect of what most people pleasers want to happen? And then how exactly do we stop people pleasing? So let's dive into that first part where we define what people pleasing is. You can kind of think of people pleasing basically as people who will do anything in order to get validation from other people. They live for that feeling of other people thinking that they did a good job, for other people liking them, because they have no sense of internal self-worth. Their entire self-esteem, who they are, and how they feel about themselves is completely determined by what other people think and what other people are saying about them. Here's a couple of things that make up, what a people pleaser is, common things that people pleasers will do. I'm going to pop up the list right here. Some of the important things on this list are, finding it hard to say no and feeling guilty, selfish, or unkind if you do, being overly concerned with other people's perceptions of you, low self-esteem, poor self-image, external rather than internal sense of worth, and apologizing even when you do not need to. A hallmark of a lot of people pleasers is apologizing to inanimate objects. When you bump into a car, you might say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That's people pleasing at its finest. So now that we have that basic definition, let's dive into some of the research and effects of people pleasing. And people pleasing actually has a lot of research on it because it's defined by the term sociotropy in the psychology community. Sociotropy is defined as, I quote, "the tendency to place an inordinate value on relationships over personal independence, thought to leave one vulnerable to anaclitic depression in response to the loss of relationships or to conflict," end quote. So basically, sociotropy is very well researched, and it was initially researched in order to study its effects and relationships with depression. So it's no surprise that sociotropy makes you more susceptible to have depression, but it also is linked to personality disorders, to generalized anxiety disorders, to major depressive disorder, and to situation-specific anxiety. In this study in particular on situation-specific anxiety, the situations that they looked at were, I quote, "social evaluation, physical danger, and ambiguous situations," end quote. So that's kind of the mental health side of things. So sociotropy or people-pleasing makes you more likely to have lots of mental health disorders. Now let's move into self-control. There's a really interesting study on self-control, and it revolves around ego depletion. So first, let's understand what is ego depletion. Ego depletion is basically at the super basic level the idea that your willpower is like a battery, or your self-control is like a battery. The more things that you do that require self-control, the less self-control you have, and eventually by the end of the day, if you keep on exerting self-control, you'll run out of self-control and you'll be unable to stop yourself from doing something impulsive, like eating junk food or something like that. That's why late night snacking happens so often, according to this theory. So how does this relate to sociotropy or to people pleasing? They did a study to look at self-control and people pleasing, and what they found was really interesting. This study basically measured the amount of time that people will spend on an impossible puzzle. They gave participants an impossible puzzle and just timed them to see, how long are you going to try and solve this puzzle? And they had two conditions. They had a control condition that before the puzzle, they didn't do anything that hard. They did a super basic kind of simple task that didn't require much self-control. And then they had a depletion condition, which did something that did deplete their self-control. So again, if we think of that kind of ego depletion or willpower analogy, the people in the depletion condition already had some of their willpower battery drained. So we have people with no draining of their willpower battery and the people who have a drained willpower battery going into the session. And I'm going to pop up a graph on the screen, which is super cool. So in this graph, we can see that individuals with high sociotropy on the gray line, right? On the y-axis is the time that they spent on the impossible puzzle, and then we have the control and the depletion conditions. So we can see with the high sociotropy individuals, if you don't have that much sociotropy, right, it doesn't make that much difference. Beforehand, if you were doing, something that did deplete your ego, it didn't deplete your, self-control that much. However, for the sociotropic individuals, their willpower seemed to be a lot lower than those who were not high in sociotropy. So any kind of ego depletion before they went in to do the impossible challenge greatly reduced their self-control, and you can see their time on the impossible puzzle was drastically decreased when they already had their ego depleted beforehand. So this suggests that one of two things is happening. Either we have A, sociotropic individuals just have a smaller battery than other individuals, or B, they exert their willpower a lot more often throughout the day than non-sociotropic individuals. My personal theory is the second one, is that individuals who have very high sociotropy just tend to exert their willpower very, very often. And we can see this in very hyper-specific examples. For example, there was a study that I found that sociotropic individuals actually tend to eat more when they're around other people. And this is because, I quote, sociotropy was associated with eating more candy, but only when participants believed that a peer wanted them to eat. Under these conditions, sociotropy also predicted greater reports of trying to match the peer's eating and eating to make the peer feel comfortable, end quote. So anyone who's a people pleaser knows it's exhausting all the time in these small, minute places like eating, paying attention to how much other people are eating, what other people are saying, what other people are doing, constantly using self-control. So I'd argue that sociotropic individuals actually have a huge amount of self-control, but because you're constantly using it, it gets depleted super quickly. And so if there's anything that requires a high amount of self-control, it's going to deplete an already depleted battery. And again, sociotropic individuals are the type who are more likely to deplete their self-control and be able to do it more readily when it comes to people-pleasing situations. So in this task where it was solving an impossible puzzle, there was no social validation to be gained, so there's probably little motivation there already to do well at the task, which is why people who are sociotropic tended to, if they had already been exhausted or tired doing something that they got no validation for, which is what they live for, they didn't really care about doing that well on this impossible puzzle. So that's kind of my take on the relationship between sociotropy and self-control. Now, the last kind of piece we'll be looking at is relationships. So if people pleasers, put so much effort into relationships, are their relationships actually any better? And the answer is not really. The first study we'll look at links sociotropy to anxious attachment styles, which shouldn't be, surprising to anyone who knows anything about anxious attachment styles and who is a people pleaser. People pleasers are overly concerned with people abandoning them, and they're overly concerned with what other people think. And this is exactly what an anxious attachment style has as well. This anxious attachment style bleeds into relationship quality for sociotropic individuals. It was found that, I quote, women's sociotropy had a complex association with relationship quality. While women's sociotropy positively predicted women's perceptions of relationship quality, it negatively predicted male partners' perceptions of relationship quality, end quote. Another interesting thing is that, I quote, while sociotropy did predict relationship quality, by and large, it did not predict relationship stability, end quote. So here we can again see that anxious attachment style is stuck in a bad relationship because, again, sociotropy didn't impact how long the relationship lasted, but it did lower the quality of the relationship. So people who are sociotropic tend to be stuck in lower quality relationships and will do so for longer because they're so afraid of losing people that even if it's a bad person in their life, they're going to continue to keep them around. And again, as this study kind of started to explore, there is a relationship between gender and sociotropy. So women tend to have a much higher likelihood of being sociotropic, and this is really just kind of due to the way that society kind of pressures women. A good quote that kind of summarizes this is, I quote, because girls are typically trained from an early age to accommodate and defer to others, a disproportionate number of people pleasers are women, end quote. And now all of this may kind of sound terrible, but this last study is the one that I think a lot of people pleasers will really relate to and will kind of push them over the edge to kind of stop people pleasing, and it has to do with how sociotropic individuals treat those who are close to them. The study found that, I quote, sociotropic individuals are overly nurturing to non-close others, but vindictive to individuals who are close to them, end quote. So what this basically means is that people, who sociotropic people or people pleasers don't know very well, they're going to be super nice to them, super friendly, everything like that. But if this person is someone they know well or who they're really close to, they're going to be a lot more mean, they're going to take out a lot of their resentment. And this is actually a problem that a lot of people pleasers run into, is that their really good relationships tend to suffer because they've spent so much energy and so much self-control and suppressed so much anger by being nice to other people who couldn't give a shit about them, that when it comes to the people who are actually close to them and who do care, they let out all of their anger because they have a lowered fear that these people who are close to them, who have been around a long time, are going to leave. So they feel more free to express the anger that they wanted to express all day long from doing constant people pleasing. So now we understand a lot about the negative effects of people pleasing. We understand a lot of the research on it. So now the question is that despite all of these negative effects of people pleasing, all the stress, the anxiety, the exhaustion, the depression, the less satisfying relationships, the lower self-control, why do people please? And this is a difficult question to answer, but the best place to start is kind of in childhood, because for a lot of people pleasers, they have an environment that really reinforces childhood from a young age. There's a super good article that I found that kind of goes over the root causes of people pleasing, and I'm going to read some of the quotes from there. So, I quote, "The seeds of people pleasing are usually planted in childhood. Often, parents will simply tell kids what to do and never encourage them to assert themselves. When the kids obey, the parents give them conditional love. Such an environment sends a subconscious message to children. The only way to feel valuable is to comply with others' demands, give others what they need, and go with the flow. The pattern only solidifies as children grow up, fearing that if they do not strive to please, people will not love them. They respond to this perceived threat by becoming obsessed with meeting others' needs." End quote. So this is how people pleasing starts. We can very obviously see kind of the pattern. You're at home, your parents or, some kind of authority figure in your life will kind of only, say good job or give you validation when you comply with their needs, not when you express your own needs. Your own needs are always shut down very consistently, and other people's needs are always prioritized over your own needs. So this creates an environment that breeds people pleasing. Whenever you shut down your needs, you're rewarded, and whenever you fulfill other people's needs, you're rewarded. So at home, this is where it starts. But the question is, why does it continue outside of the home? And this is the really sinister part of people pleasing. This quote I'm going to read again really sums this up well. "Once established, such behaviors become self-reinforcing, which makes them difficult to uproot. They get rewarded by bosses, coworkers, and friends, just as they do by their parents, promoting pleasers to assume doormat postures over and over again in hopes of receiving more kudos." End quote. So again, it starts at home. At home, you get rewarded for suppressing your own needs and then for valuing other people's needs. And it doesn't just end there. When you go out into the real world, everyone loves people pleasers. They kind of unconsciously will love people that they can take advantage of, because people pleasers are willing to do whatever it takes in order to make someone else happy, and who isn't going to like that? So because of that, they get more of that validation that they got at home in the real world as well, and they've become conditioned to crave that kind of validation at home, so of course they crave it out in the real world. And because people are rarely validated for standing up for themselves or not suppressing their own needs, this becomes a very self-reinforcing vicious cycle where the people pleaser craves validation from other people, and other people also want them to continue craving that validation so they can keep getting the same results from that people pleasing person of assuming a doormat posture and doing everything that they want. So now we understand kind of the root cause of people pleasing, and so this is kind of how it starts. At home it begins there, and then it's reinforced by the outside world, which is why it continues. So the next kind of thing is, why is people pleasing so destructive, right? Why does it cause all of these issues, this depression, this stress, this anxiety, your self-control gets eroded, all of this stuff, right? Why are your relationships so much worse if you're putting so much time and effort into them? And this oftentimes makes no sense to the people pleaser. For them, they've been told their entire life to suppress their needs and to help others, and to always prioritize other people over themselves. And when they do that all the time, what they find to their dismay is by the time you get to kind of college or your early 20s, that's when you'll start to realize that a lot of your relationships are actually very, very bad because of your people pleasing. And the reason that this happens is a little bit complicated, but we're going to kind of dive into it right now. So if you're a people pleaser, right, all you care about is validation. All you want from other people is that for them to tell you that you're doing a good job and that you're, cool, you're great, all that kind of stuff. So when you crave validation, it doesn't actually matter that much who it comes from. You just want everyone universally to give you validation. And this becomes a problem because some people, right, people who accept you for who you are readily going to give you validation. They're always going to be kind to you. They're always going to be there for you, supportive of you, etc., etc. And those people become people that you're not really concerned with getting validation from, because from getting validation from them is easy. You've kind of already gotten validation from them. And when you get a steady supply of validation from someone, you don't feel as much of a need to invest in the relationship because the people pleaser only craves validation. So if it knows you're going to get kind of validation from someone, it doesn't really matter. You don't put that much effort into that relationship. You're like, okay, this is set. All I want is validation. I'm getting it. I don't need to invest in this relationship. And the people who are giving this continuous stream of validation are typically people who accept you for who you are, who really like you as a person, who don't care if you're a people pleaser or not. They just want you to be you. And that's all that's drawing you to them. It's just that they think you're a cool person. And those are genuine friendships oftentimes, or family members who are really supportive and kind. However, when the people pleaser comes across someone who does not validate them, who does not, immediately say you're doing such a good job or appreciate them and stuff like that, and is rather standoffish or mean or cold, they will desperately crave validation from that person. Because again, it doesn't matter who is giving it, They just need to give you validation. And if they're not giving it, the people pleaser becomes extremely upset, and they become obsessed with finding a way to get validation from this person who refuses to give it to them. And this is why so many people pleasers will end up in toxic, destructive relationships, because they're chasing validation like it's air. They desperately need it in order to survive. So if someone doesn't give them validation, that person becomes priority number one. And oftentimes that person who isn't giving them validation doesn't accept them for who they are. There's a reason they're not validating them. There's a reason they're mean, they're standoffish, they're cold. They're not a good fit for the people pleaser, but the people pleaser doesn't care. They just want validation. So they'll desperately go after that person, try and do everything in order to get them, to give them that validation. And when they finally do get a little bit of that validation, it feels extremely good. However, in order to get validation from someone who doesn't accept you for who you are, who is really mean, who is really manipulative, who is very cold, it requires you to bury a lot of anger. It requires you to, exert an enormous amount of self-control to not snap, in order to stay kind, in order to tolerate lots of abuse and lots of suffering. And this takes a toll on the people pleaser, because the thing is, when you're pouring that much energy into a negative relationship, your positive relationships start to suffer. This is why a lot of people pleasers will end up in abusive, negative relationships, where they're pouring so much energy into this horrible relationship because they desperately want validation. And when all your energy is going to this terrible relationship, it makes all your good relationships start to suffer. This is where that study comes in from before, where people pleasers are overly nurtured to non-close others, but vindictive to those who are close to them. They build up lots of resentment from constantly doing things that they don't want to do, for being someone that they're not, for neglecting their own values in order to make other people happy. There's lots of resentment that's building up there. And then that resentment needs to get out. It can't just stay inside forever. It needs to escape. And so it escapes on people who are close to them. Again, people who are consistently giving them validation, who accept them for who they are, because for those people, the people pleaser isn't concerned that they're going to stop giving them validation. They know that's a steady stream of validation. So what they'll do is they'll take out their resentment. That's a safe place for the people pleaser to dump all their anger that they have on other people, because they know that this steady stream of validation, whether it be a family member or a really good long-term friend, they know they're not going to leave. So they kind of treat them not the best. And this is something that people pleasers feel super guilty about. They can't understand why are they so mean to people who are so close to them, and why are they so nice to people who are not close to them. But again, it all ties back to that excessive need for validation. So that's one piece of it, like neglecting your good relationships and focusing on your bad relationships, and how you kind of get drawn into those bad relationships. But another big piece is that when you're doing all this, let's say you just have good relationships, none of your relationships are bad. When your entire focus is on other people, what other people want, and you're constantly focusing on that, you're neglecting your own needs dramatically. So this makes it actually really hard to even find people who do share your values, who do share your wants, and who are compatible with you, because you don't even know who you are. You don't know what your values are. All your values are just dependent on whoever it is you're talking to. So if that's true, everyone you talk to is going to seem like a good fit. If you kind of find yourself constantly being in bad relationship after bad relationship, picking up friends who are very terrible for you, and who all your friends who are close to you are screaming at you like, this is a terrible friendship, this is a terrible relationship, but you can't seem to stop finding yourself in those, this may be why. It's because you don't have a clear grasp on what your values are and what you want to do, and you're so used to people pleasing that you'll just adopt the values of whoever it is that you're talking to. So this is what leads to people pleasers actually having worse relationships despite investing so much care and time into their relationships. So now that we understand why people pleasing is so destructive, we understand the psychology behind a people pleaser, the desperate craving and search for validation, how do we stop? How do we stop people pleasing? How do we stop finding these terrible friends? And how do we start finding good friends, people who are supportive and people who do love us for who we are? And the number one step, the first thing you have to do is you have to realize, and you really have to fully accept, that the thing is that people pleasing isn't why people like you. People do not like you just because you are super nice, or because you are, bend over backwards and you're always perfect and all of this. People like you for you, and that is it. And you might be saying, well, if I stop people pleasing, so many people will stop being friends with me. good. They shouldn't be friends with you. No one should stop a friendship with you just because you have discontinued people pleasing. People pleasing is not a prerequisite to a good friendship. In fact, you shouldn't people please, and your good friends will kind of stay around. No, people pleasing is an unhealthy thing to do in general. So that's the first thing you have to realize, is that people pleasing is problematic for all the reasons we listed. It's going to damage the people who do accept you for who you are, and it's going to put you in toxic relationship after toxic relationship, which is going to eat away at your life. But again, it's going to impact the people around you, and not just anyone around you. It's going to impact the people you care the most about, the people who are the most kind, caring, and considerate in your life. So understand that the first thing you have to get down if you want to stop people pleasing is you have to understand that being a people pleaser does not increase your relationship quality. Being a people pleaser does not get you better or more friends. Being a people pleaser simply destroys the good relationships that you have and then attracts negative relationships into your life. So to stop people pleasing, you have to realize that following your own values, listening to yourself, and being kind to yourself are actually good things, because it'll leave you with the energy, the time, and the mental resources to invest in the people who actually are good for you, people who are close to you, and people who do matter in your life. So number one thing to realize is that being a people pleaser is not a healthy thing to do. It damages a lot more people than it helps. And if you stop people pleasing, you'll be able to improve the relationships that you already have that are really good, and you'll be able to find much better relationships that'll make you happy and fulfilled. And again, if you're happy and fulfilled, everyone else around you is going to be more happy and fulfilled. So that's the first step. If you want to start fixing it, you have to understand that first. The second step that you have to do, the more practical kind of thing that you can start to implement, is that start saying no to things. A sentence that really kind of shocked me when I was, doing people pleasing at first was that you can say no to something just because you don't feel like going to it. And I challenge you, if you're a people pleaser watching this right now, go ahead and, say no to something just because you don't feel like doing it. Even though you have no excuse to not make an event, if a friend calls you to hang out and you just don't feel like going tomorrow, or you don't feel like going to hang out with them, just say no. That's it. As simple as that. That's the number one challenge I would give to anyone who is a people pleaser, because I think that would be the best way to kind of just start asserting some boundaries. You just want to start saying no to things that are inconvenient to you, and only say yes to things that you have the time for. And again, if you find that little voice in your head saying, oh, you're being selfish, you're being unkind, you're doing this, you're doing that, remember, by prioritizing yourself, you're prioritizing the people you care about the most, because the happier you are, the better you're going to be able to invest time, energy, and resources into the people who are closest to you. So use people pleasing kind of to your advantage. If you care about people a lot and you want other people to be happy and you care about their well-being, remember that caring about yourself helps you care about them. That's the first part. Say no to things. Say no to things that you don't feel like doing. And as a challenge, say no to something that you just don't feel like doing. That's it. You can just say no. Don't give any reason. Just say, nope, I can't do it. That's it. Second thing is setting boundaries. People who are people pleasers have constantly have people crossing their boundaries, doing things that they feel uncomfortable with. And the reason that people pleasers will let other people do that is because they seek validation. And when you let people cross your boundaries, they do thank you for it, or they will be grateful for it, or they'll definitely value you more in some cases, but that's unhealthy. That's not something that people should do. Assert your boundaries. If someone does something that you don't like, tell them they can't do that anymore. If someone keeps on, coming over at a time that you say is not okay, if someone, like for me, I had to, go to bed at 10 p.m. each day, but my roommates would kind of keep me up, or they would have their TV on super loud, something, just simple things like that, nothing super intrusive. I would just started kind of really enforcing, hey, let's keep the TV down past this time. I have to go to bed. If we're gonna make plans, I can't be in them if we're gonna, have them this late. So simple things like that. Set boundaries. If you're not okay with something, it's okay to say that you're not okay with it. And again, you may get pushback at first. People may be very upset because they're used to you not giving pushback, but remember, if people are your true friends, if they really are good people who should stay in your life, they will not force you to do things that you don't want to do. You are allowed to kind of do whatever it is that you want to do. You are allowed to set boundaries and kind of do what makes you feel comfortable. People who are nice, who are good friends, who are true friends, will accept that and respect that. And if people don't respect that and accept that, kick them out of your life. They're not worth it. So the two things we've said so far, kind of understanding saying no to people and then setting boundaries. And the third, kind of one of the most important things, something you can start doing right away, is self-compassion. Get an hour out of each day just to do something nice for yourself. Do something that you enjoy. Do something that makes you happy. Because the thing is, again, the happier you are, The more resources you have, the more resources you can invest into the relationships that you truly care about. And if you think you have infinite resources, you don't. Remember that thing we talked about where it's like people who are people pleasers will be mean to those who are closest to them when they're constantly too nice to people who are not close to them. Keep that in mind. Okay, with that, let's quickly just summarize kind of what we covered in this video. So one, we went over the effects of people pleasing. It has lots of, makes you predisposed to lots of different mental illnesses. It makes your relationships worse, and it has lots of effects on your self-control. In addition to that, the reason that we people please is that it starts in childhood. When we're really small children, people pleasing is very incentivized by the people around us. And then as we grow up, people outside of our family and outside of the place that we started in also very much so incentivize people pleasing. And this keeps us in this dangerous kind of self-reinforcing cycle where we people please, at home, we're rewarded for that, and we go out in the real world and we're also rewarded for that. But eventually it does damage your relationships and it makes them, get worse and worse over time. So in order to combat this, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand why people pleasing is bad, which we covered in this video. And the next thing you have to do is start saying no to people. Make sure you say no, even if you have no excuse, for why you can't make something or make an event. If you just don't feel like going, say no to something. Set boundaries, make sure you tell people that what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. And the last thing, do some self-compassion, do something that makes you feel happy, do something that makes you feel a little bit better. With that in mind, remember, you are enough as you are. You don't need validation from other people. And if people require validation in order to stay, your friend, those are not good friends. You should let them go. I hope this video helps. Thank you so much for watching and take care.